Gibanja za pravice Palestincev, BDS Slovenija, vas lepo pozdravljam danes večer. Mi smo izredno veseli, da je z nami danes profesor Ilan Pappe, izraelski zgodovinar in aktivist. Za nas je to res velika čast, tudi zaradi tega, ker profesor Pappe je izredno zaseden in smo ga dobesedno ujeli za rep, tako rekoč. In novinarka Kristina Božič bo profesorja Pappeja v kratkem tudi predstavila in tudi vodila današnji dogodek. Jaz bi rada samo omenila, da je gibanje BDS Slovenija del svetovne kampanje za bojkot, dezinvesticije in sankcije proti Izraelu, dokler ta ne bo spoštoval mednarodnega prava ter pravic palestinskega naroda. O kampanji BDS bo seveda več spregovoril profesor Pappe sam. Sicer pa smo mi tukaj v Sloveniji pričeli z gibanjem leta 2012, to pa zato, ker menimo, da ima Slovenija odgovornost, da se zavzema za spoštovanje mednarodnega prava in za pravice človekovih pravic. In to pa naj dodam, ne glede na velikost naše države. Mislim, da vseeno naš glas lahko tudi ima svoj pomen. Istočasno pa želimo tudi kot gibanje osvetliti dogajanja v Izraelu in v Palestini, ker smo mnenje, da o teh stvarih se veliko piše, veliko bere, ampak bolj malo ve. In seveda želimo tudi spodbuditi solidarnost s palestinskim narodom in današnji večer je del tega našega prizadevanja. Torej, radi bi se zahvalili profesorju Pappeju za obisk v Sloveniji. Posebna zahvala gre tudi Cankarjevemu domu kot koproducent prireditve in pa seveda Kristini, kateri sedaj predajam besedo, preden moram še nekaj drugega povedati, ali moment. Bi rada tudi povedala, da je jutri profesor Pappe bo imel predavanje na Filozofski fakulteti ob 11:20, torej vabljeni tudi tam. Hvala lepa.
Lep pozdrav in dober večer tudi z moje strani. Jaz bom zdaj kar v bistvu preskočila v angleščino, kar bo potem potekal tudi pogovor v angleščini. Če bodo pa kakšna vprašanja, kasneje pa brez težav tudi zastavite vprašanja v slovenščini in potem prevedemo, čišče to zaradi občutkov lažje ali kakorkoli. So it's an immense pleasure and a great honor to sit here next to you, next to Professor Ilan Pappe, a historian, professor at the moment at the University of Exeter. He holds the chair in history and is also a co-director of the Exeter Center for Ethnopolitical Studies. He is an author of numerous books, 17, and I will not name all of them. I have 2 of them here. Few are borrowed to people who want to read them. I guess one of the most famous ones is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. That came about after the archives were opened in Israel and it became clear everything that happened during Nakba. And I guess the book could serve also as a historical source of all the proofs or everything that happened and could be used even as an indictment for all the injustices that happened at the time. Now, the last 2 books that Professor Ilan Pappe has written are Idea of Israel and The Bureaucracy of Evil, The History of Israeli Occupation. When we talk about Israel, usually it's very easy to connect it with Palestine and 2-state solution, and then everything becomes very problematic and people don't agree, and there was Palestine and there is still Palestine today, but is there really, are there 2 states, is there 1 state? Now, you were born in the state of Israel. You come from Palestine. I'm wondering, where do you come from?
Thank you. That's a good way of starting. I will try and give you a long answer as we agreed, so that you don't think I'm impolite by answering it for half an hour. That was the plan. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for bringing me over. I know it wasn't easy, but I'm very happy to see you all, even those I don't see. Happy to see you. And I do hope that by answering in detail this question, I will also be able to provide my own take on the history of Palestine, and this could be a basis for our conversation later on. I think there's something very important in telling a personal story, because after all, history is not just documents. It's not just an archive. It's not just an academic, scientific work in places like Israel and Palestine. It becomes part of your life. It becomes part of your mission in life. It becomes part of your cause. And it is as much a political activity as it is an academic activity. And when you realize that, you, I think, write with far more compassion, emotion, commitment, that would hopefully makes history more relevant to people today. One of the main problems of the media coverage of Israel and Palestine today, and in the last 20 or 30 years, is that journalists, for obvious reasons, have no patience for history. They would like to report what they see. Sometimes they give you a very short background about the history, but they don't really think that history is relevant. Now, you cannot understand why what happens in Gaza is as bad as what happens in Syria and Iraq if you don't know the history of Palestine. You cannot understand what is the connection between what goes on in the Middle East as a whole, even in the relationship between Muslims and Europeans and the question of Palestine, if you don't have an historical perspective. If you try to understand it as something that only started today or happened in the last year or two, you will not understand what the problem is about. And when you don't understand a problem, the solutions you give are usually not the right solutions. So I think what the first point I would like to make, that for me to understand who I am or where I came from, I needed to understand the importance of history. And my tendency was, as a political activist, was not to look at the past. To say, forget about the past, look at the present, look at the future. This is a very Israeli thing to do, because the Israelis are only interested in a very distant past. In Israel, you talk all the time about what happened 2,000 years ago, what happened yesterday, but not in between. In between is the Palestinian territory, so you don't want to hear about it. The good news is that you know what happened 2,000 years ago, and you know that today Israel is there after, for 2,000 years, it wasn't there. If you want to talk about 48, if you want to talk about 1967, this is irrelevant. What you have to talk about is either today or 2,000 years ago. So the first thing I did was deciding that I want to know what happened between the 2,000 years and today. And I was always interested in history because I like to read about history, and some people have hobbies and tendencies which are different from others. For me, the past was a very exciting world, maybe because the present was not so exciting. I always, as a child, I always liked to read about the past. And it's only natural that if you are interested in history, you are interested in your own history. And I was brought up in a typical Israeli Jewish family, which means I haven't met any Palestinians until the age of 18, which means that I was part of an educational system that had a very clear historical message to me about who I am. I was taught, as all my Israeli Jewish friends were taught, that 2,000 years ago there was a Jewish homeland or state or kingdom destroyed by the Romans. The Jews were exiled by the Romans, dispersed all around the world. And 2,000 years later, almost as a miracle, the Jewish people came back to their empty land. There were people without land coming to a land without people. And ever since then, the sad story of exile is replaced by the story of success, triumph, and progress. I experienced myself as a child several wars. I fought in one war on the Golan Heights, and it doesn't shake your narrative, the fact that there are wars, or you're even a soldier in the war, because part of the story you learn is that not everybody is happy with the return of the Jews to Palestine, and there are nasty people who do all they can to destroy the dream. Some of the nasty people live far away, in Iraq or Morocco. Some of them live nearby, in Syria or Egypt. And some of them live inside in Israel itself. But the basic idea was that you are fighting to preserve the most modern, most just, the most enlightened, most progressive human project there ever was after the Second World War. When you grow up, they even tell you that, of course, Israel is the answer to the Holocaust. It's the answer to anti-Semitism. It's the answer to brutality against Jews. So you grew up in an educational system that makes you, at least tries to make you, be very proud, which I think every national educational system does. I don't think Israel is exceptional. But I think it has a problem of answering the reality. You have to explain why are the wars, why are there, as the Israelis would call it, terrorist attacks against you, why are people around the world feel that your state is not behaving morally and legally. All these things have to be answered by the educational system. And the answer is, as you know, the world is anti-Semitic, basically. The Arab world is particularly anti-Semitic, and the Palestinians are the worst. And nonetheless, you are just, you are right, you are exceptional, you are the chosen people. Now, to get out of this image is difficult, very difficult, because in Israel itself, the narrative is not the only thing you get. You also get privileges. If you are part of the Jewish group or society, it means that you have all the political rights, you have all the natural resources, you have all the military might. So why should a normal person give up privileges if the society tells him, you're lucky, you were born into a privileged position, which is rightly yours, which is justifiably yours. And one of the reasons so few Israeli Jews resist this historical narrative is that they don't want to lose the privileges. Most people in the world don't voluntarily give up a position of power, of privilege, of strength. And I often ask myself, why did I give up this position? Why did I get out of it? What caused it? And not because I thought my personal story was that interesting, but because I thought it could become a political program. Because I wanted, after I transformed my own views, I wanted others to follow in the same direction. So I thought if I would understand what happened to me, maybe I can help other Jews in Israel go in the same direction. Because I think without changing the Jewish society from within, it would be very difficult to reach peace and reconciliation in Israel and Palestine. And I'm looking at the station that I did in this journey out of Zionism, as I call it in one of the books. Yes, I do write too many books, I agree. One of the books I wrote called Out of the Frame, I call the tour out of Zionism a journey. It's like a journey. You take a journey. And what is so particular about this journey is that there's no return ticket. There's no return ticket. I thought, by the way, I had some colleagues that did have a return ticket. I didn't know that they went out of Zionism and back into Zionism. I felt that my train was only going in one direction. But there are stations, and there are very important stations, which tells you a lot about Zionism, the Jewish society in Israel, the connection between that society and the lack of justice and reconciliation, not only in Israel and Palestine, but in the Middle East as a whole. The first station was, in my case, very incidental. It was not meant to be there. I had parents who left me for very long periods alone at a very tender age, and part of the arrangement was that I should eat in a Palestinian restaurant at the age of 6 or 7. So I didn't meet any Palestinians even in that restaurant apart from the cook. But he was not a good cook, but he was a good Arabic teacher. So I didn't eat well, but I did learn a lot of Arabic. And that I fell in love with the language. And those of you who speak Arabic, especially literary Arabic, know what a wonderful language it is. At first, knowing this language was very well greeted by my school and society. Israelis want Jews to learn Arabic to become intelligence officers, which they offered me as well, because if you speak Arabic, the only reason you should know Arabic is to know the enemy. At first I fell into this trap, but then later I actually used this ability to read, to listen, to talk in Arabic, to do something most Israeli Jews were unable to do, which is to humanize the Palestinians. Once you humanize someone, once you know their name, you know their language, you know their fears, you cannot treat them anymore as generally as the enemy, as the other, as danger, and so on. And I think for me, this was a very important step. And one of the things I'm trying to do when I am in Israel, as part of my wish to create a different society, is to try and convince Jews to learn Arabic. And I don't mean just the language. The language is more than just words and grammar and syntax. The language tells you something about the people who speak it. In fact, the land still speaks Arabic. It doesn't speak Hebrew. It's an Arab land. It's not a Hebrew land. It's not a Jewish land. It's an Arab land in which, in the last 100 years, a lot of Jews settled in and colonized and therefore also impacted the land. There's no doubt about it. Now it's an Arab land that speaks Arabic in a Hebrew accent or has a lot of Jewish Jews in it. But basically it's part of the Arab world, it's part of the Middle East, it's part of the Islamic civilization, and 95% of the Jews in Israel refuse to recognize it. As if you in Slovenia would insist that you are part of, I don't know, Latin America, because you have colonized Slovenia, because 2,000 years ago you used to live here, and you left Latin America and you came here, and you immediately planted jungles and all kinds of things that remind you of Latin America, and refuse to recognize that this is Europe. It's bizarre, but that's what Israelis are doing. They even planted trees that came from Europe to make sure that they don't feel part of the Middle East or the Arab world. So the first station was Arabic. And then came the historical inclination, historiographical inclination, the interest in history. And I studied history in the university. And in the university, you meet the narrative I was talking about as an academic truth. In fact, as a scientific truth. And there, two things can happen to you. Most Israeli Jews who decide to study history and then to teach history and become sort of sophisticated academics still support this, for me today, is the impossible narrative. Despite the fact that they would have a BA, an MA, a PhD, they would be established scholars, they would still believe in one way or another and prove in one way or another that Palestine, for the last 2,000 years, or 2,000 years before the arrival of the Zionist settlers in the late 19th century, was an empty land, nothing happened there, and that the settlers who came were returning back to their homeland after 2,000 years of exile. They will still depict the Palestinians as terrorists that are inflamed by Islam, Arab political culture. They would still not recognize the Palestinians as natives. They will treat the Palestinians as best, as immigrants. At worst, they treat them as invaders, as people who took something that did not belong to them. And the whole discourse, the whole language of Israel, if you are attentive to the language, if you care about words, you can see that for Israelis, the language, the main language when they talk about Palestinians and they feel that they are part of the peace camp in Israel, is the language of concession. I'm kind, I'm generous, so I'm willing for you to live in 20% of Palestine. I don't mind if you have a piece of land here. I don't mind if you will be a citizen in the state of Israel if you behave yourself, if you don't undermine the state. This is the language of the peace camp. Of course, the mainstream is not talking the language of concession. The mainstream, as we have seen in the last election, talks the language of Netanyahu, that the Palestinians are a fifth column, are a danger, are a demographic bomb, and that has to be dealt with, and you have to be alert all the time, because you have these people who are citizens, but are also spies and terrorists in potential, even if they have not yet become so. So in between allowing you to stay and being afraid of your stay lies the Israeli narrative. And most of the people who went through the relevant departments in history in the university stuck to this narrative, even when they became professors and doctors and should have known better. Now I remember that my first problem in the university was a contradiction that until today Israel doesn't know how to solve. I remember asking a very famous professor of mine who told me that Palestine was empty before the Jews came. I asked him, if Palestine was empty, who are the Palestinians who left in 1948? And he looked at me, his name was Yoshua Porat, and he said, you're a troublemaker. And your life will not be easy in this place. And I said, maybe, but can you answer the question? And he said, well, it's not that important. I said, no, it's very, very important. And then I decided, this was 1974, 75, I decided to devote my life to finding out what happened in 1948 and who were the Palestinians. Less who was I. You asked me who I were. Much more important for me was first, the second station was to ask who were the Palestinians. And it's amazing what happens to you when you decide that there were Palestinians, that they used to live there, and many of them are not living there anymore in 1948. I remember going with my family, my friends, to all kinds of places in Israel, where it was very obvious that there was another life there before 48. A destroyed house, an olive grove, a street name, a memory of people. And I began, even before I got to the archive, I had a very clear idea that there was a vibrant Palestinian society in my own home city, where I was born in Haifa, but also the rest of Palestine. That nobody in school or university talks about that society. Nobody in the political system acknowledges that society. And when you know what happened to the Palestinians there, you have a much better understanding of the Palestinian resistance, of the Palestinian struggle. you understand that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians did not start in 1967 when Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And the more I went into it, and luckily I decided to do my doctorate on 48 outside of Israel with an Arab, Lebanese professor, you see, of course, something even more sinister than just people disappearing. People don't disappear like in an earthquake, when you can blame an earthquake or a tornado. If people disappear, someone had made them disappear. And then you realize it was your uncle, it was your father, it was the cousin of your father, it was the family, it was the friends, and you go through a very painful process in understanding that a certain generation in your life was doing something very wrong in 1948. And the more I went into it under the influence of the civil war here in the early 90s, not here, I mean, I know you were luckier, I heard today, than the rest of ex-Yugoslavia, but given the events in ex-Yugoslavia in the early 90s, that influenced me very much. I understood that what the Zionist movement did to the Palestinians was a crime against humanity. And that's when I started to use the term ethnic cleansing to describe what the Palestinians had gone through. And it became clearer to me that I belonged to a society that had two major characteristics. One, it was not unique in the world. It was a settler colonialist society. The Jews were not the only people driven out of Europe and seeking new life. There were a lot of Christians who were driven out of Europe seeking new life in North America, in Latin America, in New Zealand, in Australia, in South Africa. They usually left Europe for the same reasons that the Jews left Europe. They were under existential danger because of their religion, or they were poor and were looking to better life. The only problem with these groups of people, who usually, like the Jews, were poor, under danger, the only problem was that they were looking for places where other people lived. And in North America, they solved the problem of the other people by genociding. In Latin America, South America, they solved the problem by genociding. In Australia and New Zealand, they solved the problem by genociding. Europeans, poor Europeans, weak Europeans, created new life by destroying someone else's life. The only place where they didn't destroy the life was in South Africa, where they decided to exploit the people as slaves, as second, if not third-rate citizens, as solving the problem that I want a new home, which I want to make a homeland, and I can't let the native destroy my dream of having a homeland. So you create an apartheid system. In Palestine, which was not different in any way, you don't create an apartheid system, you don't genocide the people, you decide to get rid of the people, to expel them. But you do it very late in the day. After the Second World War, it was not that easy to genocide or to ethnic cleanse as it was before. The people themselves resisted. They still resist to this very day. So the ethnic cleansing is not complete. The settler colonialist project is not complete. But most of what you do, whether you bomb people to death in Gaza, whether you occupy the West Bank, whether you don't allow full rights to the Palestinians in Israel, whether you destroy a village in the Nakab, or you don't allow refugees to return, it all comes from the first feature I was talking about. It comes from the idea that you wanted to build a new homeland in someone else's home. And as long as they are there, you will never have a proper homeland. And that is something all the Zionists share. The second feature I understood about my own society was not only unique, was not unique in its colonialist nature. I also understood where its uniqueness lay, which is important for getting the history into my own history and into the future. And I will close my opening speech in a moment. I come from a German Jewish family, and it was a very established family in Germany, and they were kicked out. They were really kicked out of Germany, and some of them came to Palestine believing it's a safe place. They came to Palestine thinking it was empty, and like all the Zionists, they decided that if it's not empty, it will be empty. So either they don't recognize, I read my family's diaries, they don't talk about the Palestinians. They don't exist somehow. I don't know how they succeeded going through Haifa, which has 2/3 of the population are Palestinian. When they arrive, it seems to be like a small German Jewish town. That's what they remember from. Everybody's speaking German, everybody's very polite, there's a lot of classical music. No Arabs. No Arabs at all. And that was typical. I mean, they was not the only ones who did this. But I understood from that particular history the connection between anti-Semitism and Zionism, and the problem of the Jews in Europe and the problem of the Palestinians in Palestine. And with this I would end. I remember giving a talk in Prague, I don't remember, it was 2 years ago. And someone asked me about anti-Semitism. It dropped all the time. What about anti-Semitism? Don't you think that if you don't recognize Zionism, or if you talk about a one-state solution, don't you think that this is anti-Semitic? You don't recognize the right of the Jews to their own homeland. You deny the Jews what you would give gladly to the Palestinians. So I thought Prague was a good example for describing my own family history and the general point I want to make. 80,000 Jews were slaughtered by the Nazis in Prague. Many of them slaughtered, many of them, the rest were expelled. And you go to the Jewish Museum in Prague, you see the Zionist narrative in its full force. There's a beautiful history of the Jewish community in Prague, very impressive. There's a terrible chapter of what happened to the Jews during the Nazi occupation, but it ends, there's a good ending. What is the happy end? According to the Jewish Museum in Prague, the Czech government gave weapons to the Jewish state in 1948. And I gave that example, and someone asked me, so what did you expect? I said, what did I expect? I expected every Czech citizen, or every Prague citizen, every mayor at least, of Prague, to make a huge effort to bring every Jew who ever lived in Prague back to Prague. And if they don't, they're anti-Semitic. Now, of course, Zionism gave them a beautiful excuse. They said, oh, don't worry, we don't want the Jews to go back to Prague. We want them to go to Palestine. Oh, do you need weapons? Of course we do, because if we want to create a new city instead of Prague, we have to kick out the Palestinians out of Jaffa. And they were the first one to give them weapons. With these weapons, the Palestinians were massacred and kicked out, with the Czech weapons. That is the second feature. The idea that Israel solved the Jewish problem for Europe is a fallacy. It did not solve the Jewish problem. What it did, it created an alliance between anti-Semites who don't want to see Jews in Europe and Zionists who don't want to see Jews in Europe. Now, had it been only a Jewish problem, I wouldn't care that much. But this explains a lot about the European attitudes towards the Muslims today, to the other, to the immigrants, to the foreigners. You don't solve your changing society by expelling those you don't like, by killing those you don't like, by putting them in ghettos. It doesn't matter whether they are Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, or Christians. And as long as Israel exists as a Zionist state, Europe can say to itself, oh look, we have solved the Jewish problem. They kicked out the Palestinians, they have now a Jewish state. Netanyahu tells all the Jews in Europe, come to Israel. If you don't come to Israel, you're making a fatal mistake, and you are not really Jews. And Europe goes along with this conversation. It goes along with this conversation, A, because it doesn't care about the Palestinians, B, because there is now Islamophobia. Netanyahu cleverly connects anti-Semitism to Islamophobia. And thirdly, because the whole world is full of people who somehow think that God gave them the air, the water, the land, and it's only theirs because they are of a certain color, because they belong to a certain family, or because they belong to a certain nationality. In 2015, it's time to realize, as human beings, that we are all here with similar rights and similar duties. And in this respect, the journey I did was from being a Zionist Jew to being a citizen of the world. I don't think I'm a Palestinian. I don't regard myself as a Jew or an Israeli. I regard myself as a human being, first and foremost. And I do believe that, and with this I would end, that the third generation of Jewish settlers in Palestine, who are now half of the population and are very powerful, and the third generation of the natives since 1948, are also half of the population, and together with the refugees are the majority of the people of Palestine. Still have to remember that. I still think that despite everything that happened, they can build together a joint future on the basis of human rights and civil rights. But of course, you will have to redistribute the privileges, the resources, the land, the fortunes, in order to make life a just way of existence. Otherwise, the conflict will continue. And finally, I think what I realized from my own life, that Zionism was not just bad news for the Palestinians, it was also a threat for the Jewish people themselves. And I think both communities in Palestine would benefit if they would replace an ideology of exclusivity, of supremacy, of racism, with an ideology of justice and equality. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned Arabic and learning Arabic and the importance of words. And you have also said that you feel that if there is no change in the words we use to describe the situation, there is not going to be, or if we don't use the right descriptions, the right words, there won't be a change. Yeah? And I'm wondering, since you mentioned memories and how they're constructed or how they leave out certain things, what are we remembering or what are we recognizing today, or even more importantly, what aren't we seeing in Palestine, in Israel today, that we should see if, I guess, we want to build a homeland that is inclusive, or not really a homeland, but a place where people, human beings, can live in a just and equal society.
This one will be shorter, I promise. But it was planned, again, and wasn't making extra use of the time. There was okay. I just wrote a book with Noam Chomsky, which came out a month ago, called On Palestine, and we'll discuss the very question that you have raised. I think that the language, or the words in the language which are missing, are connected to the memories that are missing. They're the two. They're one and the same. The main word that we have to use, and it's very difficult to use in 2015, is colonialism. Very difficult, because for most of us, colonialism is a chapter in the past. We know exactly when British colonialism ended. We know when French and Belgian colonialism ended. We know when the big colonialist empires collapsed, and we know the colonies became independent states. So how can you talk about colonialism, or settler colonialism, as I like to call it, which is a more appropriate term for Zionism? But this is a word, this is memory. I'll tell you why it's memory. The important thing about colonialism in Israel and Palestine is that we are still in that historical chapter. Palestine is a weird place. It's both colonialist and post-colonialist at the same time. The world talks about Palestine as if colonialism ended, and all you have is two national groups who are just waiting for an American grown-up to come and help them settle the dispute. But the reality on the ground is that the colonialist project is the most important project. Israel is about in 2016, if this government holds on, Israel will annex Area C. Area C, how do you annex Area C? By colonizing, by sending Jewish settlers. The Judaization of the Galilee, the Judaization of the Nakab, the Negev, continues. The whole project is to bring Jews from around the world to come and settle in Israel. The whole project is to make Palestinians feel unwelcome in Palestine. So the memory of a Palestinian from 1948 and the memory of a Jew from 1948 are not just a memory of what happened 67 years ago. They reflect what's happening today and what happens tomorrow. I think that what gave me the motivation to write my book about 1948. Because I started writing in 2000 when I watched Israeli police shoot at Palestinian demonstrators in the city of Nazareth, nearby to where I lived. And snipers shooting them. And one son of a good friend of mine was shot in the back by an Israeli policeman and died. And I remember that I suddenly realized that what I see in 2000 is what I read about in 1948. In terms of time, you are in the same space. You're in the same time zone. It's not the past, it's not just the present, it's also the future. And when you describe the situation in Palestine and Israel as a colonialist situation, I think you understand which memories are wiped out and whose memory are being retained. And I'll give you with this I will end, a small example that I learned when I started to be an academic in Israel. Before I got to the archives, and because not everything could be found in the archives to write my book, I started to interview Palestinians about 1948. And I remember my colleagues saying to me, but come on, these are memories of Arabs from Haifa. It's full of Oriental imagination. You know, the Arabs, they have these, 1001 night stories. And I remember saying to my colleagues, what about the memories of Jews from the Holocaust? Why do you treat them as sacred? I said, yes, but these are Jews. I said, does it matter if the one person who recollects is a Jew or a Palestinian? Or does it matter how many years have passed? Do we need to understand that certain things you remember, certain things you cannot remember? I fully agree. Memory is not always trustworthy. And there are problems in oral history. We all know this. But to say that the oral history of the Palestinian is not to be trusted, but an oral history of a Jew from the Holocaust is to be trusted, gives you, in a nutshell, the connection between historiography, memory, politics, and ideology. It's all in the same place. And we can see it every day. I'm a bit of a junkie with courts. I go a lot to courts, military courts and non-military courts. And you can see it in an Israeli court. When a Palestinian citizen and a Jewish citizen come to the judge, and some of the evidence has to rely on people's memory, or whether you trust the evidence, or sometimes it's my evidence against your evidence. A Palestinian has no chance in Israel. As a Palestinian, he can probably not remember, and if he remembers, he usually lies, and he cannot be trusted. It's the DNA of the society that makes one memory a lie and another memory a truth. And it takes a lot to change, to deprogram people to understand that memory is valid or not because of the identity of the person who memorizes, but because of other, more objective elements.
Now, not long, so actually on Monday, the organization Breaking the Silence has brought out a book that is full of testimonies, thank you, yes. Testimonies of Israeli soldiers that took part in the Gaza war that happened last summer. And also what these soldiers say, because they fought even in the war on Gaza in 2008 or in 2012, is somehow that the level of lawlessness or the level of destruction that was easily tolerated has increased and increases with each and every attack that happens. So for Good Morning, the tanks were put in a line and they shot at a Palestinian neighborhood or Gaza neighborhood there. They killed people that they saw on the streets because they were there, and because they were there, they had to be a terrorist, because no civilians were left in those places. So that was what soldiers were told. They say basically that every rule of engagement, everything was broken, nothing's true. So there is this deterioration, it seems, of, well, not just Israeli military, but also Israeli somehow society, its democratic fibers. And I'm wondering, if we see this Israeli, or Jew and Palestinian in 1948, today, in 2015, what has to happen to break free out of this model?
Yeah. First of all, I think that what has increased is the level of awareness of soldiers of the dehumanization. I think Israeli soldiers did terrible things in 1948, which would not shame Israeli soldiers in 2014. But it is true that as dehumanization continues year after year, you become more and more indifferent to what is going on. And it begins by looking at Palestinian villages as enemy bases, looking at the urban space in Gaza as a big terrorist camp, and looking at every Palestinian child as a terrorist in potential. And once you have this way of looking at things, you know it's very easy to become a war criminal. It doesn't matter whether you are a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim. We can see all over the Middle East how easily people become, how easily people dehumanize other people once they have the power, absolute power in the life of someone else. Nobody is immune for that. Not in Europe, not in the Middle East, and not in Palestine. And therefore, the way out of this brutality, goes through two directions. Because there is a danger that Gaza would be attacked again, if not next year, then in 2 years. And because there is this danger that other Palestinians will be brutally assaulted in a similar way. We don't have time to educate people who dehumanize someone else to stop dehumanizing. That's a long process of education. If you want to stop other atrocities in the Middle East today, you don't start a program of education in order to stop genocide and slaughter and mass rape and so on. You stop it. The only way to stop it is by international pressure and a very clear international message. And what people don't realize, that one of the reasons the international message does not work in Syria and Iraq is that the world is not willing to send the same message to Israel. Israel's exceptional status in terms of human rights and civil rights does not allow us any normal conversation about human rights and civil rights anywhere else in the Middle East. Now, for the long term, I think you have to focus your life, your activity, your education programs, everything you do on human rights and civil rights. And this is not only difficult for the Israeli Jews, it will be difficult for the Palestinians as well. Nationalism is an important part of the Palestinian heritage and history, and the national struggle was a struggle that kept the Palestinians alive. We have no doubt about this. But is 2016 the year of national struggles, or is it the year of struggle for human rights and civil rights? And the younger Palestinian find it probably sometimes easier than the older Palestinians to accept this as a new focus of activity. I think you can defeat Israel in moral terms, in political terms, on the basis of human rights and civil rights agenda. I can't see any other agenda that will work. You will never defeat it by military force. You will never defeat it by religious enthusiasm and zealotry. And you will not, and you should not, even I as an Israeli Jew does not want it to be defeated militarily. This means that I want my own family to be killed and so on. But there is a good chance for exposing the inhumanity through a very strong and clear popular struggle based on human rights and civil rights. So one of the things the soldiers against silence, the breaking the silence group of soldiers, are not doing, and they're doing such an important work by bringing to us these evidences, these testimonies of the brutality. One thing they don't do, and we have to do, is to connect that brutality to the major issues in Israel and Palestine. Otherwise, it will seem as if there was only a slight problem in the summer of 2014, and there is no real issue here apart from this. No, there is a deeper issue here. There's a deeper issue. You know, this is about militarism and Zionism and colonialism. This is about not reporting about war crimes when they happen. This is about not going and serving in an army that does these atrocities. They have to go another extra mile. They have to join those of us who say, we don't want to serve in an army that does it. We don't want to report atrocities. We don't want to be part of the atrocities. It's not easy. I know. I have 2 boys. One of them just finished a very harsh military prison term because of his refusal to serve. My other boy is going to the jail because of that. I know it's difficult, but to be part of the military is not the right thing to do. It's not enough to report the crime. You have to get out of the criminal outfit to make it work. So I think that we need a lot of brave Israelis now who would understand what is the price that they have to pay. And we need great support from the outside of the BDS, the boycott, divestment and sanction, so that these people will not feel crazy. They will know that the rest of the world is thinking the way they do. We need the Palestinians to get their act together, to embrace also the Israeli progressive forces and create a new movement of change that is based on human rights and civil rights and not just on national rights, so that both settlers and native people can share a future.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes. Excuse me. What about the interference of America, Iran, and so on?
Yeah, the outside forces. Yeah, yep, you're right. It's a good question. It's not enough to have the goodwill of the people. I think that if there is a strong will within a community to deal with its problems, even the most powerful external power can have no impact. It can have an impact when you're not willing to do what needs to be done. For example, if the Jewish community, Jewish society in Israel, or the state of Israel, does not want to recognize the Palestinians as equal partners for the future, then they can use America in order to prevent international pressure or military defeat and get the support of the Americans for their project of colonization. Similarly, if there are Palestinian factions who do not believe that the Israeli Jews have any right to be there, some regional powers would give them weapons and support for this. But imagine that there would have been a joint movement of Palestinians and Israelis believing in a democratic state all over Palestine. Who cares about Iran? Who cares about the United States of America? Who needs them? You need them if you are in a conflict. You don't even need them for peace. We understood that in a very We paid a high price for thinking for many years that only the Americans can bring peace between Israel and Palestine. That was a terrible mistake. America played a very negative role in killing the chances for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. So I think the lesson is actually that Israelis and Palestinians don't need outside forces. What they need is to understand what has to be done. And the first group that needs to understand it are the Israeli Jews, because they are like the whites in South Africa during the time of apartheid. And at a given moment, the world began to play an important role. The moment the United